All right, we are recording. Hello and welcome back to the Slow Reading Virtual Book Club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring Eudora Welty's novels, The Robber Bridegroom and The Ponder Heart. During the series, we have read and discussed about 40 pages of each book each week, starting with The Robber Bridegroom. And today we are finishing up with The Ponder Heart. A final discussion next week comparing both novels will end our series. We are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and professor emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. I am Anna Traylor, the education specialist at Eudora Welty House and Garden. And just some quick housekeeping: to comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. You may have to tap your screen if you are on a tablet or a phone for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at the chat box every now and again. So, Suzanne, where shall we begin today's discussion?
All right, so we have 3 chapters today, all dealing with the trial. And I want to talk about, at the end of the time, I want to take some time to talk about the whole idea of a trial. And then I want to talk about the title, The Ponder Heart, in view of these chapters. So I want to do that last. But let's talk about the trial. We have the prosecution, chapter 5, the defense in chapter 6, and Uncle Daniel taking the stand in chapter 7. So let's break it up and talk about those 3 chapters, and then take some time to talk about those issues of the question of a trial and of the heart, of the ponder heart. So the prosecution, we have the witnesses coming forth are Truex Bodkin, the coroner, Big John, the messenger, Miss Tea Cake McGee, the ex-wife, and Narcisse, the cook and all-purpose manager of the Ponder Place. So let's start with, and we have the prosecutor Doris Gladney and the defense attorney Deancy Clanahan. So what about this chapter stands out to you? What do you think's going on here? Anyone want to start us off? Any suggestions here? Why don't we start with Mr. Truex Bodkin, the coroner? Why do you think Welty is doing with this? This is the first witness presented in the chapter. Mr. Truex Bodkin, anyone have comments about him? He's the coroner. He has one notable characteristic. He's blind. So the blind coroner, let's talk about that. What are we doing with the blind coroner? Not worthy of notice? Is justice blind here? Or is Welty playing with that notion of justice being blind? What do you think, Joellen?
Yeah, he's
Thank you for
blind.
saving me here, Joellen, by the way.
Oh, excuse me?
Said thank you for saving me from a
Oh, I don't have a lot to say about this chapter, but yes, blindness just continues the theme of incapability, inadequacy, and kind of ridiculousness. But the name Bodkin also brings to mind that our traveler, to whom Edna Earle is speaking, she says, "Too bad you left your car in the hands of a bodkin."
Yeah.
And there are other bodkins, or bodkin allusions, and I think they're all negative. Certainly, there's a snootiness on Edna Earle's part. So I think he might be. Is he the most worthy of the? I can't remember who the third witness is, but anyway, he certainly is a better witness, Edna Earle thinks, than is Big John.
Okay, so we have, I'm always also thinking of the bear bodkin and
Yes.
But so we've got this whole notion of the bodkins as a group that Edna Earle looks down her nose at in her class conscious way in the town. but this man is particularly unsuited to be a coroner, you would think, to examine the body if he is blind. And this notion that justice is blind is not always a positive thing. So it's Welty doing her usual turning of the sort of truism on its head. We're going to come to tickled to death later on. So I'm just tickled to death. So here is one of them and I think you have that notion that that justice in this small southern town is not really a matter of investigating evidence and coming to conclusions, but it does proceed rather blindly. Gladney gets the answer he wants here from this man, but that whole question of what is justice and how is it determined is being interrogated, I think. And what about the second witness, Big John? What about Big John? Let me read you two passages about Big John. This is Edna Earle talking about Big John. Would you guess that after all he had done for him, Uncle Daniel had taken on himself to send Bonnie D his own message? That same Saturday I stopped the money, he did it. By word of mouth, of course, and he picked out the slowest, oldest, dirtiest, most brainless old Negro man he could find to send it by. I thought it showed a little ingratitude. And then Big John is called to the stand, and Gladney says to him, "Now I can tell you're a reliable Negro." And then that's on page 386. When he finishes with him on the stand, he says, "Well, go on, Uncle. I'm through with you." So what about this calling of Big John to the stand and the attitude toward him on both the part of Doris Gladney and Edna Earle? What's going on here, do you think? Of course, you know what I think. What I think is that the racism of the courtroom is being exposed. Both, well, maybe Edna Earle's sense of Big John, her sense of superiority to him, her racism coming out. And then Doris Gladney, I can tell you're a reliable Negro. Okay, there are two kinds, of course. You know, so there's that racism coming out on the part of Doris Gladney. And we're going to find out in the next chapter that the courtroom has a Confederate flag in it. So this is a kind of institutional racism as well, I think. So yeah, Joellen?
First, I just want to note that the section that we read for today is utterly different from the first sections, and getting us to about halfway through, where we have lots of Edna Earle and setting up the auditor, the fellow she's talking to, and getting to know everyone. And here we have bing, 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 as you said, prosecution, defense, Uncle Daniel takes the stand. It's kind of like Law and Order, where you have the setup and then the trial in the second half of the show. But I wanted to note that on page 387, the most interesting thing to me about Big John and is in the first longish paragraph, where clearly Big John remembers when there's money and doesn't otherwise, but where he says, "'Cause Mr. Daniel gave me a dime." That was all he could think of. But I knew it was because of that high esteem Big John held Uncle Daniel in that made him remember so fine. He always did like him because of the money he could deposit on them. And then he didn't mind old dirty people the way you and I do. So he let Big John come around him and listen to what he said, both. They listened to each other. When you saw them walking white and black together over the back lot, you'd have thought there went two moguls looking over the world. And I'm not entirely sure what to do with that, but we're sort of all over the map here in terms of who John is.
I was going to call attention to that passage too, and I think it suggests if Uncle Daniel is seen as foolish because he doesn't value money, he's also seen as foolish because he doesn't make judgments based on race, it seems to me. He is, I think, kind of treats Bonnie D in a kind of misogynistic way. But as for Big John, as for Narcisse, I think there's a positive relationship there, and that it's in contrast to the kind of dismissive relationships of other white people to African American people. So that I see it as a kind of another undercutting of the kind of racism that goes on here. We've got Jane and Harriet and Bill.
Okay, am I on?
Yes, you are.
I just want to say that I don't care to read too much of the racism issue in this story. I know it is there, and I think Eudora Welty is painting us painting of ridiculous characters, and she is poking fun at society, and she's using, for instance, the motif of the Confederate flag. She's using that as part of the local color to paint the thoughts of the people that would be at the trial, the particular community that she's trying to set up for us. And I think she's just having some fun with painting these particular characters as racist in her story, because at the time probably that this trial would have taken place, there would be a lot of racism in the town.
Well, I think you're right. It's realistic, but I think it's also pointed. And it's criticism, but it's in the midst of a comedy, and it's not in the midst of a biting satire. So that, but it comes in, I think, more subtly, perhaps, than in a more biting satire. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I think you may have said what I was going to say, which is, that Welty portrays racism in the town, and she also portrays the exceptions. And I'm just thinking about all we could have said last time about the relationship between Bonnie D and Narcisse.
Yes, right.
And how, in terms of social expectations, we have an underclass woman and a Black woman, and they should be in a relationship that is not giggling and enjoying each other. There should be tension between them, and instead there is bonding and a sense of collaboration and pleasure between the two.
Yeah, and even at the end of this chapter, where they say, what does she usually do during a storm? They crawl under the bed together. Narcisse and Bonnie D do, and Edna Earl is just outdone with that. And she says, at the end, she just washed her hands of us. That's Narcisse. You can't count on them for a single minute, And she's upset that they've crawled under the shelter together. And she says, Bonnie D didn't really like Black people to start with, but now there she's crawling under the bed with her to shelter from the storm. So I think that's right. That's another example.
And the portrait of Narcisse. I mean, Narcisse is this woman who is being given condescending orders by Edna Earl, who is painfully condescended to, and assumed that and she proceeds to drive the car, to be in charge, to do what she wants to do.
Yeah, and she defends Uncle Daniel from the stand. He doesn't have an aging heart. What does that mean? Gladney says, and she says, you didn't raise him. So she's thinking, I raised him. So there's that. Bill and then Pearl. Yeah.
Yeah, just two observations about both Big John and Uncle Daniel. On the bottom of page 386, in this testimony, keep on, tell Miss Bonnie D what? Big John fixed his mouth and recited it off. I'm going to kill you dead, Miss Bonnie D, if you don't take him back. I would have thought Big John would get the message wrong to begin with. That's one reason I'd never have picked him. But there was no mistaking that. He got Uncle Daniel right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He is a
So,
good witness. Yeah.
yeah, and so he also got Uncle Daniel's voice into the room, and Uncle Daniel hadn't been allowed to wasn't going to be allowed to testify. And then the other point, it's already been read. When you saw them walking white and black together over the back lot, you'd have thought there went two moguls looking over the world. So Big John carried his money in his top pocket and let any African American take the money out of his pocket. Who does that remind you of in this story?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Mm.
mean, so I look at him as being the analog for Uncle Daniel. They both are generous. They're two moguls who give away whatever they have. And so it's kind of a foreshadowing of what's to come, too, of the white analog in this particular instance. So, yeah, I thought it was a great character and a great summary of both Uncle Daniel and Big John there.
Yeah. Both of them generous spirits and both looked down upon for their generosity. Yeah. Pearl.
I wanted to say about the mogul also, that here's another example, I think, of the sort of reverse irony that Welty is playing with. First of all, she capitalizes mogul, so that's like a Muslim person of great wealth and power, but still that's another sort of racism that's coming in there by Welty capitalizing it. And secondly, to raise Big John up to the same equal level as Uncle Daniel is sort of working for us and for Uncle Daniel and for equality rather than doing the negative work that she's trying to do, that Edna Earl is trying to do.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah.
There.
Oh, very good. I'm glad you brought up about the mogul, especially. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, shall we talk about anything else in this chapter, or shall we move to the defense? Anyone want to read anything else here?
I would love to read a comment in the chat from the chat.
And then
Judith.
Ellen has one too. Yeah.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Sure. The chat, Judith said in the chat that she found the prosecution curious because Edna Earl has led us to believe that Uncle Daniel and the Ponder family is well regarded, even loved in the community, something that would presumably shield him from this. But in the community, people are willing to prosecute and testify against him. Edna Earl is far from a reliable narrator, as in other instances. So that's from Judith.
I think that the people here who are testifying don't even realize that they're being called for the prosecution, though. And then Miss Tea Cake is asked, is he dangerous? I wasn't afraid. And then Edna Earl says, I think she keeps a gun under her pillow. So she wasn't afraid. Big John is clearly fond of Uncle Daniel, and Narcisse defends him. So all of these witnesses are sort of undermining Doris Gladney's case, I think. Yeah. Joe Ellen?
Yeah, I just want to point out again that we are in a dramatic situation here, and that Edna Earl seems to be narrating point by point as things happen. And notice she's really degrading Big John before she gets to the point where Big John got the message right. Then she tells us about what I think Bill described nicely as him being an analog to Uncle Daniel. And she is working an auditor, remember? So she's kind of setting him and us up in various ways, and we need to be sure that we're interpreting her that way.
I think that's a very important point. So here, our court reporter is Edna Earl Ponder, who is shaping the narrative as she's recording it, and then who's going to suspend the narrative and have a long monologue before we get to the end of the trial. So, all right. Anything else here? Let's go to the next chapter. And here we have witnesses 1, 2, and 3. The Blackberry Lady, the Iceman, and the Blind Man with brooms. Witness number 4, Dr. Eubanks. Witness number 5, Edna Earl. Witness number 6, Johnny Ree Peacock. In the jury, we have Eubanks, Peppers, Sistrunks, and Bodkins. And we have DeYancey Clanahan calling the shots for the defense. What about this chapter? Anything stand out to you here? Anyone? Suggestions? Yeah, Jane. We can't hear
One
you.
thing in particular is that Edna Earl, who is the niece of the person who is on trial, is providing lunch at her hotel
Yes,
for the prosecution, the judge, and I guess not the prosecution, for the judge and everybody connected with the trial. I don't know if Gladly was at lunch or not. I can't recall.
I don't think he's listed as going to lunch, but the judge stops the trial and says, well, we need to find out how many are going to be there for lunch. So that's another sense that this trial is proceeding in a rather provincial, clannish circumstances, shall we say. What else going on here? What about Edna Earl's testimony stands out to you? Edna Earl as witness, and she's recounting her own time as witness. And she's been very reluctant to tell us too much. She's held back, but it's coming. Yeah. What about Edna Earl as a witness? She reports first that when she and Uncle Daniel arrived, Bonnie D was deader than a doornail. All right. Then she's questioned by Gladney, and he gets her off to talking about the ball of fire that came down the chimney and frightened Bonnie D to death. And Edna Earl seems to have contradicted herself, because she's suggesting that she saw the ball of fire come down the chimney, and if she did, then Bonnie D would have still been alive. And then she's got to get out of that contradiction. So, Harriet, what's going on?
Well, I may be jumping too far ahead for you, but I was just thinking about Edna Earl saying that that she's never lied before in her life, that I know of, by either saying or holding back. But I flatter myself that when the time came, I was equal to either one. That idea of rising to the occasion of lying, and the Edna Earl's relationship to the town, to Uncle Daniel, the idea of whether she betrays him by lying, but it's that is what she does in the scene.
Yeah, so she is lying, and she later says, well, I've never lied before that I know of. Yeah. But she has her priorities, and loyalty to her family supersedes loyalty to the truth. So we have that going on. Jo Ellen?
I love Edna Earl's attention to detail when she reports on her appearance, her Milan hat, her dinner ring, her other glasses, and the dress she's wearing now. Now she's wearing it for every day. So, that doesn't exactly push the story along, but it keeps her in its center. But almost immediately they ask her about the threat, and we've read it only once. I'll kill you if you don't let me come back home. And I'm curious what other people have to say about that, because my own Southern family bears witness to this to some extent. Threats flying all the time, at least exaggerated speech. It might not be so much "I'll kill you dead," but maybe. So anyway, I was just interested in that.
Yeah, oh yeah, I think everyone. Well, I think everyone's heard sort of idle threats like this that are just the exaggeration. Yeah. So
straight from Grandma.
Yeah, this all came from Grandma.
Oh, and finally, what she's trying to establish, she says, those words never meant a thing.
Yeah, right. I think we have here Edna Earle also casting herself in the role of Edna Earle, in the sense that Edna Earle in St. Elmo is the beautiful, devout girl who's going to save the dissolute man. Here, Edna Earle is and I'm thinking of the Edna Earles as sort of female power behind the throne, using power but not claiming it overtly, protecting Uncle Daniel. So trying to live up to her role, and it's a way of asserting her control of the situation. And if lying is required, she'll lie. Anything else about that? What about, here's one more example of the racism in the courtroom on page 402. I hope I've got the right page. Gladney. So he's calling her on her lie. I'm way behind the times, says old Gladney. Can't keep up with you at all. Now a ball of fire like that N-word of yours saw. I've yet to see one that might and might not know one if I met it on the road. So he's luring her in. But here comes the use of the N-word, and it's right out of the prosecutor's mouth. And so the racism, which has been not as explicit in terms of language, here comes in terms of the language as well. All right, Uncle Daniel takes the stand. Oh, Bill, let me go with you first. I can't hear you,
Yeah,
Bill.
yeah, sorry, I had trouble getting my mute off. For one thing, you wonder why she's trying to keep him off the stand. And part of it is because you learn that she's not been an honest witness. She doesn't want him telling the story. That basically he tickled Bonnie to death. So she has to be dead when they come in, and that's what she has trouble keeping her story straight and all the facts straight. And I thought it was an amusing testimony. It was a confusing testimony until you get to the end of the story, and then you start understanding why she did what she did. And so you asked about Uncle Daniel. What a character! I mean, how do you actually convict him in that kind of town, in that setting, when he just gave away all of his wealth? It's like, did he buy the jury? He bought the whole town.
Yeah.
and he bought him with the gift of guilt along with the money. So it's quite an interesting twist on the story, and it's not what I saw coming. I mean, I was reading this as kind of a humorous story all along, and then there's a death, and then the family has to sue to get him charged with murder, and it was definitely an interesting, twisting story.
Yeah, and you can see why they decided to turn it into a Broadway play, because the second half of it is essentially dramatic. The first half is not, and as Joe Owen's been pointing out to us. So we're getting set up for the final bit here. Pearl?
First, on all of these incredible details, like Joe Ellen was reading about, I mean, that all adds to the humor of the story. And I can picture the William Maxwell and Emily Maxwell laughing at those parts, all the descriptions, which are in most cases way over the top, like when she's describing the different characters and so on and so forth. And so we know it's Edna Earle telling this and being overly dramatic. But I came in a little late because I had trouble getting on. So maybe you've already talked about this when Joe Ellen was talking about the bodkin. But as soon as I read bodkin, I think about The Crucible and Arthur Miller's play, which was 1953, but the bodkin as the piercing needle and so on and so forth. And the Salem witch trials are, large in my mind while I'm reading this, which is just as ridiculous. People take sides. it's about hearsay, it's about personal vendettas against one or another. So that's just what I was going to throw out.
So here is the comic mode as opposed to Miller. Yeah. Yeah, Joe Ellen.
Oh, just two quick things before we leave chapter 6, the defense chapter, that I don't think we've remarked that, and this is the bottom of page 403, that Edna Earl says when she leaves the stand, when I sat down again by Uncle Daniel, he looked at me like he never saw me before in his life.
Yes.
And that's left hanging just a little bit. We start to get it later. And we haven't mentioned Johnny Rhee as a witness.
We could talk about Johnny Rhee.
Yeah, or that Ovid Springer reported having seen her in Memphis. And the testimony is hilarious. She tells about the time in Memphis, going to see as many movies as they could, et cetera, riding up and down escalators, I think. But then we get to the point where maybe that's at the very end. My eye is on, so Johnny Rhee was just a substitute, but she didn't know it. Anyway, she says that Johnny Rhee says that Bonnie D never even went to Memphis,
Right.
that she wanted to stay home, have a bed to herself, and eat mama's greens. So that's just a kind of double turnaround bit of humor.
Yeah, and Yancey is wanting to suggest that Uncle Daniel in fact, Yancey's giving him a motive for killing Bonnie D, that Bonnie D has betrayed him by going to Memphis and what was going on in Memphis. And in fact, she was never there. And then Mr. Springer, she has a sense that Mr. Springer has betrayed her by ratting out the story of Bonnie D in Memphis and her Mr. Springer. Yeah. Bill? Nope. All right. So Johnny Rhee and Uncle Daniel immediately having his head turned by Johnny Rhee. Here's a substitute for her sister, although she's going to turn him down later on. All right, chapter 7. Uncle Daniel insists on taking the stand. But let's come back to where Bill says that he looks at, or maybe it was at you, Joellen, where she sits down and looks by Uncle Daniel, who looked at me like he never saw me before in his life. He can't believe she said this, He can't believe she's not told him the story. And then he's not going to be able to tell it himself ultimately. And she only tells it to the man in the hotel. Okay, let's go on to Uncle Daniel and what he reveals. And then when Bonnie D... when Edna Earl then tells us what maybe really happened. I'm not sure we know for sure what really happened, but maybe what really happened. So what about Uncle Daniel's behavior here before he gives away the money? He reveals for sure that Bonnie D was alive when he and Edna Earl arrived. And in fact, he imitates her voice perfectly.
Yeah.
So we have this, Delancey was leaping up and snapping his fingers, objecting his heart out. But what good does objecting to Uncle Daniel do? You just get fired. Uncle Daniel would have fired the angel Gabriel right that minute for the same thing. You could never stop Uncle Daniel from going on once you let him know he had your ears. And now everybody was galvanized. Hollered, she hollered at me. I don't appreciate lightning and thunder a bit, said Uncle Daniel proudly. And in her voice, he did have it down to a T, like he could always do bird calls. He looked over our heads for Narcissus and smiled at her. Everyone let out one of those big courtroom sighs. So he reveals, okay, she was alive. And that then he says, I said, catch her, Edna Earl. Gladney says, Bonnie D was running. No, falling, says Uncle Daniel, falling to the floor. Oh, we never did talk about Dr. Eubanks, but okay, I'll come back to him later. So let's look at the section where Edna Earl picks up the narration. She does stop Uncle Daniel from talking, and she picks up the narration.
Which is just to her auditor.
Yes,
And
just
us.
for
Yeah.
just to the man who's, I
Right.
assume, a man who's staying at the hotel. That's the only one she tells. And so it goes. Uncle Daniel sat down beside her, and she wouldn't even look. She pulled herself in a little knot at the other end of the sofa. Here came a flash of lightning bigger than the rest, and thunder on top of it, and she buried her face in the pillow and started to cry. So the tassel of Grandma's antimacassar came off in Uncle Daniel's hand, and he reached out and tickled her with it on the ankle. The storm got closer, and he tickled a little more. He made the little tassel travel up to her knee. He wouldn't call it touching her, it was tickling her, though she didn't want one any more right now than the other. Of course, Uncle Daniel and I had both been brought up to be mortally afraid of electricity ourselves. I'd overcome it by sheer force of character, but I didn't know Uncle Daniel had. I believed he overcame it then. I believe for Bonnie D's sake he shut his own ears and eyes to it, just gave himself up to trying to make her stop crying. All the while, it was more like a furnace in there, and noisy and bright as kingdom come. Grandpa Ponder's house shook, and Bonnie D rammed harder into the pillow and shrieked and put out her hands behind her. But that didn't do any good. When the storm got right over the house, he went right to the top with Creep Mousie up between those bony little shoulder blades to the nape of her neck and her ear, with the sweetest, most forbearing smile on his face, a forgetful smile, like he forgot everything then she ever did to him, how changeable she had been. But you can't make a real tickler stop unless you play dead. The youngest of us knows that. And that's what I thought she did. Her hands fluttered and stopped. Then her whole little link slipped out from under her fingers and rolled down to the floor just as easy as Nod and stayed there. With her dress up to her knees and her hair down over her face, I thought she had done it on purpose. Well, I says to Uncle Daniel, I don't think it's such a treat to get sent after. The first thing Bonnie does when we get here is far from ladylike. I thought that would make her sit up. Catch her, Edna Earl, he says, catch her. That's when he said it. I marched over and pulled up her hand, and it hung a weight in mine like her ball and Jack's were in it. So did her other hand when I pulled it. I said, Bonnie D. Peacock. That's when the ball of fire came down the chimney and charged round the room. The ball of fire Narcisse took for her story. That didn't scare me. I didn't like it, but it didn't scare me. I didn't like it, but it didn't scare me. It was about as big as your head. It went up the curtains and out through them into the hall like a butterfly. I was waiting for Bonnie D to answer to her name. When she wouldn't do it, I spread back the baby hair to see what was the matter. She was dead as a doornail, and she died laughing. Okay, so Harriet, what about that?
Well, I'm going to go someplace else. I think than just about that, because I wanted to go on to talk a little about money. So if you want me to wait, I will. Let's see what anybody else wants to say about it.
Let's wait for that. I think I saw Pearl.
No, not me.
Oh, not you. Sorry. Okay. Anyone want to talk about this big long passage I've just read?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it, I guess.
Good. Go, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, she had such strong emotions. First time she's ever laughed at Uncle Daniel, and she's frightened to death of the storm that's outside. So she's got both those things going on at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, could she get tickled to death or frightened to death? I don't know. Maybe she could get both of them to death.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's kind of how I read it, and a marvelous reading you just did, by the way.
Oh, thanks. I love showing off, but I'm not all so good at it. Yeah. Joe Ellen.
I want to just look ahead at page 419 and cast back onto this monologue, where about a quarter of the way down the page, this is after the money's been tossed out.
We'll let Harriet come in after this then. Okay.
Okay. She says that Bev, or whatever her name, Clanahan, was right, that the money had cheered him up. Uncle Daniel's face had come back the ghost of a smile. By that time, I think all he wanted was our approval. Then we have a parenthesis, which is to the auditor. And I don't give a whoop for your approval. You don't think I betrayed him by not letting him betray himself, do you? Which suggests to me that Edna Earle believes that Uncle Daniel is responsible, whether by tickling, whatever, for Bonnie D's death. I wondered what people thought about that.
That's an interesting question because I hadn't thought of it that way. I had thought that she just didn't want him to tell that because she said nobody will ever believe you and you'll be taken for guilty.
Yeah, it suggests to me that she let the money throwing go on so that he wouldn't talk. And betray himself into having them think that he actually was responsible anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone want to talk about that? Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I think that she is also trying to avoid her feeling that she has betrayed him, that she has that he needed to speak, that he could have spoken. He certainly needs to speak in this scene, and so I read it as her worried about something that she has done a little presumptuously in defending him in a way that maybe he didn't need defense. But then I read him as, yes, responsible in the sense that he's caused her heart attack, but not more than that.
No,
not as a murderer. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's taken his voice away from him, which is what he values, and she's taken it for herself. So she stopped him from speaking, and it's her way of finding her own power by claiming the voice. And maybe in that sense, she's betrayed him. Yeah, Pearl.
That's so. Oh.
So I think we're fortunate that we don't have Law and Order actually going on here, and that it is. Because then we'd have to distinguish between first-degree murder, second-degree murder. I mean,
manslaughter.
He's responsible, but unintentional in the kind of thing. So it's good we keep it, very loose as far as the Law and Order and the whole trial goes. And didn't Welty say that she used to go to night court?
Oh yeah, she didn't work all the time.
So she knows the kind of ridiculousness of the people and the arguments and the situations that she can easily portray here.
I think it also suggests a lot about this community that they're not going to find Uncle Daniel guilty. Who's on that jury? Sistrunks, Bodkins, Peppers, Clanahans, Eubanks. This is a community jury. They go in, they want to see what's going on. They come back right away. And the notion of any kind of justice being achieved is probably, even though we think it was accidental what happened, he wasn't trying to cause a heart attack. He was trying to soothe her, probably. But we're also not quite sure if Edna Earle's giving us the accurate story, I think, either. I mean, she's already shown she's willing to lie for him. So how do we know that this story to the man in the hotel is the truth either? I mean, so I think there's some ambiguity there. Joellen and Bill.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, but there is a change of tone in Edna Earle's voice through here. And I really was reading sort of seriously, you can't stop a tickler, and that she really was insistent on him not stopping. Just really continuing to go whatever Bonnie D was saying and wishing. So anyway, in that sense.
Yeah. Bill and Harriet.
Yeah, we've noted some of the racist stuff that's gone on, but kind of underneath all this stuff is all the pinching of women, the tickling of women, the pulling on Johnny Reed's dress. I mean, the family just accused him of killing her sister and with him sometime. Now, it's humorous, the story, but you think about what that culture would be like, having people be able to put their hands on you, which it seems like that was a fairly common thing, and pinch you if they thought you were pretty or whatever. So, there's that's just sitting right out there causing all kinds of things, and he tickles her to death. So I don't think that Ms. Welty is avoiding any of that stuff by talking about how common that kind of thing was.
Yeah, no, I think she's playing with it. She's pointing it out to us. It's in the midst of a comedy, but it's the social comment is there nevertheless. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I think there are lots of ways in which this story leaves us with a sense of Uncle Daniel as a problematic character who is it can be indicted on a number of things, but maybe not murder. So anyway, I said I wanted to talk about money, and we're just there now. I want to say that she goes on to say, "That's enough, Uncle Daniel," I says real firm and real loud. "You can't answer that. You can't tell it to a soul." Though clearly he has given her away her lie and needs to speak. And Uncle Daniel's mouth opens, and sure enough, he can't. Uncle Daniel stood still a minute on the witness stand. Then he flung both arms wide, and his coat flew open, and there were all his pockets lined and bursting with money, which he proceeds to give away. And I'm thinking about the parodic cliche comedy of the cliche "money talks," because it does. And he gives his cash away, and court is closed. The investigation of justice is deferred, although the Peacocks do all right. They hung back the longest with their mouths open until old Gladney sends up a cry to the Peacocks, then grab what you can. There was no telling, he says later, how much money the Peacocks got, but remember, there are many of them and how many hands that made. Uncle Daniel succeeds in giving away all he had, and we can talk about redistribution of wealth in this community. But he succeeds in, while he gives away everything in the Ponder estate, he also gives away Edna Earle's inheritance. And she says, "Now I'm tell you something. Anything Uncle Daniel has left after some future day is supposed to be mine. I'm the inheritor." And we remember Edna Earle had plans. I've sometimes thought of turning that place, the hotel, into something if and when it ever comes down to me. A chinchilla farm may be the answer, but that's the future. Don't think about it, Edna Earle, I say. I think that one of the thing that Daniel is guilty of here in relationship to Edna Earle is undermining her future. It is behaving in a way that I think we want to talk about his giving the money away because are we supposed to read Uncle Daniel as a communist, or is it that there is a kind of power to giving money away and controlling response? It doesn't work out. So you were saying that in this town he would never be indicted. Well, I'm not exactly sure because it does. The community freezes them out after this. There is a change in the relationship after.
It is suggested that's because they've kept the money that they
Yes.
know they shouldn't have kept. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's worth talking about. Both the redistribution of wealth and why he does it. Yeah.
I think as typical with Welty, all things are double. So here's Uncle Daniel in giving this money away, following on up on his pattern of kind of excessive generosity, and the town thinking in terms of more of the main line. But on the other hand, he has, as you say, he's undermined Edna Earle. There's Uncle Daniel who can embrace Big John, but who treats women the way Bill has been pointing out. There's Bonnie Doo who can embrace Narcisse and who can insist on her own independence, but who is manipulative and material. She's a material girl. So there's all of these things that kind of doubling back on themselves, I think. What do you think of that, Harriet?
Yeah, I think that the relationship between Edna Earle and Daniel Ponder is more complicated than fondness. Yes.
All right. Go Ellen.
I just wanted to point out that the community's reaction to them after the money was all given away was probably because there was no longer any power dynamic there, and they weren't rich anymore.
Yeah.
If money talked, and that's probably the main reason Johnny Rhee turns away Uncle Daniel's attentions when he proposes that he go over and take her writing sometime.
Oh,
And
you cynical! You're such a cynic.
But back up on the top, toward the top of page 419, I think that word approval, we do need to think about more. That Edna Earl,
Give a whoop for your approval.
she doesn't, but
Yeah.
she has just said that she didn't think Uncle Daniel had understood the charge until a certain moment before. But when a ghost of a smile came onto his face, by that time, I think that all he wanted was our approval. And that strikes me as something needing a little bit of attention. It wasn't just for him to be seen as a big shot. He wasn't necessarily generous in the usual sense of the term, but seeking approval in that kind of patriarchal culture, I think has something for us there to think about.
Buying affection. Pearl?
I was going to respond to this idea that we really need to think about the relationship between Uncle Daniel and Edna Earl, something that I would have to go back to the beginning and be concentrating all the way along to what they actually maybe say to each other versus what Edna Earl reports to Mr. Springer or whoever is trapped in the hotel. And on 422, at the bottom of the page, just for the spacing, I'm not sure if this is reported to the auditor as Joellen has called the person listening. He says, he got as far as the landing and turned around and called down, "You fooled me up yonder at court this afternoon, Edna Earl. I declare you did. But never mind, I'm staying just the same. You didn't fool me as bad as Bonnie D did." I mean, this is like, I just wanted us to read that.
Yeah, you women have got me in your clutches, and you've and have been fooling me all along. Yeah, so there's that sense. Yeah,
But he's staying the same.
Yeah,
He's not going to change.
But fooled how? By lying? Her lying?
no, I think Bonnie D. How does Bonnie D. fool him? Do you think, Pearl?
Well, he thought he could just. It could be that he thought he could just tickle her and make her laugh, and assuage her that way, keep her back. I mean, that could be, and then
it could be the whole marriage. That when the marriage is on trial, but then she leaves, then she comes back, but she pushes him out. She calls him back, and then she's not embracing him. So she fooled me, and then Edna Earl, I think, by not letting him speak, by taking power from him there. Harriet?
Yeah, I think that Bonnie D betrays him by deciding the marriage is on trial. And I'm amused by the line, which almost closes it, that I'm sure Bonnie D and Uncle Daniel were as happy together as most married people. Judgment on marriage now.
Yeah. Joellen?
Yeah, sorry. I think that Bonnie D fooled him by dying. He didn't seem at all that worried about her leaving and coming back and all that stuff. It was grist for the mill. He loved telling the story, and he does do that in summary, even at the trial.
Yeah.
But you fooled me up yonder at court this afternoon, Edna Earl. I declare you did, but never mind.
I think that's right about dying. He wants her back.
Yeah. And I think Edna Earl by lying.
Yeah.
That's when he looks at her as though he doesn't know her. Anyway.
Well, yes, I think that's right too. I mean, she does stop him for speaking, but what really stymies him is that she has lied, and he wants. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think he might have been talking about the fact that she told most of the story, and came to the dramatic part of it and left it off. And so he was probably maybe taken aback. She was telling the story, and and he wanted to tell the story, and then she ruined the story for him. So I think that kind of might have been what he meant referred to, but I don't know. It's mysterious. Yeah.
Yeah. There's everything in great fiction but a clear answer, says Eudora. Right. All right, Harriet.
He counts on having his way. He believes he will have Bonnie D back if she doesn't sneak out on him this way. He believes that the court will acquit him if he speaks, and we are talking about an element of entitlement that runs through the portrait of Daniel that is interesting in this work at the level of how much it is about class and class relationships, and so I think Uncle Ponder, Daniel Ponder is and grandfather are particular portraits of male behaviors of a certain class.
But it's also Edna Earl, the assumption of
Yes.
of class, and Dr. Eubank says it never would entered my mind to doubt what a Ponder would say. All right, so they assume that what they say goes. Yeah, Joellen and Susan.
Just very briefly, I'm not sure that we're intended to put this all together logically, but it seems to me that there are a lot of clues tempting us. And the one thing that I continue to remember about Uncle Daniel is that, and I think Bill may be right, that he might have thought at first that Edna Earl hadn't told it right, hadn't told the dramatic parts. But at the bottom of page 416, you'll remember that when we come back after Edna Earl's monologue, Gladney wants Uncle Daniel to speak. That's when Edna Earl says, "You can't answer that. You can't tell it to a soul." And Uncle Daniel's mouth opens, and sure enough, he can't. And what he couldn't tell really was the tickling part, if it had to do with anything substantive. But so anyway,
Susan,
do we have time for an art history moment?
Yeah, go.
I just wanted to say the only thing about using the library book is the first edition has the most wonderful linear drawings by Joe Crush, Krush, and he was a courtroom illustrator. So they're all through the book, and the front of it has not like you would think of Uncle Daniel, but this really kind of cute white cutout with the pink heart, and then Edna Earl, or maybe it's Bonnie D, is in the background. So I just wanted to mention that. And his wife, Beth, is the one that did Shoebird. So they must have been buddies. I don't know that much about it. But anyway, just want to mention that, Suzanne. We don't need to ignore the art history part.
Maybe next time we'll have a look at the illustrations. I bet Anna can put those up on.
Yeah, that would be fun because they're really nice. The other thing is that it makes you realize there's so few of these works that we've seen on stage. And for those of us in Jackson, the New Stage Theater did it twice here. And one of our beloved older actors, Thomas Spangler, was Uncle Daniel in the white suit. And it just kind of brings all that back. And I think it speaks to me about Eudora's work and how I really wish there was a play of Optimist's Daughter like Glenn Evans wanted, but that this is also a play, not just, it has been produced as a play, not just the book.
Yeah, the play is something different, I think, from the novel. And it's, a good thing to do would be to study them side by side and look at what's happening.
Right, but just kind of how the work goes into different, she was able to do that. So anyway, just a thought for the end. Thank you.
Yeah. Pearl.
Joe and Beth Crush were a married couple that worked together on the illustrations. Right. And Welty had sent photographs to them of picturing the towns and
I didn't know that.
Pieces about it. I'll send the link when we discussed this in the Eudora Welty newsletter years ago.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
All right, let's see where we are. Well, we're out of time. Now, I still want to talk about the whole question of the trial The first half of the book is the marriage on trial. The second half of the book is a trial. So I'd like to talk about that. And I'd like to talk about why the title, The Ponder Heart. Why the heart? Why ponder? And why name the family Ponder? So we can talk about that. But then our ostensible purpose next time, we'll go to that quite quickly. We'll think about the two together. And Anna sent you the article about historicizing the Ponder heart. We might try historicizing the robber bridegroom and its time of composition and why this might have happened as one of our points of departure next time. But we'll talk about any commonalities and about the key divergences in the two texts. So, anything else before we go? Going once, going twice. All right. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.